Well, honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real privilege and honour to be here with you this evening. James, thank you very much for that introduction. It's one of the things I'm still getting used to in politics is people saying nice things about you, and it's very humbling, James, and it's great to count you as a friend. I consider James a fellow warrior for the cause, and last year, in fact, when we debated the Chinese extradition treaty, I got a sense of James' conviction and his principles, and it is a real privilege to serve with you, mate, so thank you. Well, yes. T.S. Eliot, 76 years ago, wrote, "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time." What is the future of liberalism? Seeking to answer this question has been a journey of exploration for me, and I've arrived back where I started. But as Eliot writes, I've only come to know it for the first time. For those of you who like the central idea up front, here it is. I will argue that the future of liberalism is also the future of conservatism. They stand or fall together. The real question before us is whether in Australia a constrained vision of humanity, politics and economics, that's our vision, will prevail against an unconstrained vision of those same things, that's Labor, the Greens and anyone else who sees the state as the starting point of life together. More on what I mean by constrained and unconstrained in a moment, but if you're familiar with Thomas Sowell's work, Conflict of Visions, that's where I'm going. My call to action will be that education is the key battleground where our movement either lives or dies. We neglect and surrender this space to our peril. So there you have it. That's where I'm going this evening. The future of liberalism is a perennial question for Western civilization. T.S. Eliot sought to answer it in a lecture titled The Idea of a Christian Society in March 1939 at Corpus Christi College, Cambridge. It was on the eve of the Second World War. Nazism, fascism and communism were on the march through Europe. And as Eliot noted, that while people loathed the European totalitarianism, they did so with a good deal of admiration for its efficiency. For Eliot, there was an urgent question that needed an answering. Would Britain adopt the pagan culture of the totalitarians, or would they seek to build a culture anchored in Judeo-Christian principles? For Eliot, Judeo-Christian culture was the lifeblood of both liberalism and conservatism. I won't cover his lectures here, but he makes some very good observations that I've accepted in my thinking, and they are reflected in my remarks tonight. Here are the important ones. Number one, neither liberalism nor conservatism is a political philosophy. That is to say, the philosophy of a political party. Political parties, instead, with a political philosophy, are revolutionary and will seek to impose their way of life on everyone. They seek to build a culture from the top down. Think of the Greens with their manifesto of repudiation and reordering of Australian society. Rather, liberalism and conservatism should be seen as philosophies of life, habits and temperaments arising out of a shared worldview. There are many similarities in both movements, but they have distinct questions that define them. For liberals, what must be destroyed? And for conservatives, what must be preserved? Both serve each other well when interacting with each other. Number two, liberalism is difficult to define. It's a movement defined by its starting point. Eliot writes, "It is something which tends to release energy rather than accumulate it, to relax rather than to fortify. It is a movement not so much defined by its end as is its starting point, away from rather than towards something definite." Let's take our federal party platform. Anchored in the freedom of thought, worship, speech and association. We seek to legislate according to those principles, accepting that millions of Australians express themselves differently in their daily lives. But we aren't driving towards some horizonless equality like the utopians in the Labor Party or the Greens, and I think that's a key insight to our movement. Finally, liberalism and conservatism are both vulnerable because of their emphasis on freedom. Both can prepare the way for their own negation because they do allow for difference of opinion. They allow for creativity and therefore the potential for chaos. To tie it all together, Liberals and Conservatives are cousins, even siblings. I think I'll start calling myself a libcon. And that's not absurd, and here is why. Both movements share a constrained vision of humanity, politics, and economics. What does that mean, a constrained vision? Very simply, it accepts the moral limitations of humanity. Human nature is fixed. Human nature is inherently selfish. We seek to consolidate power, and we can be quite unneighbourly. We accept this as a basic fact. Of course, we're creatures of virtue too. But the question is, how do we best live together with this constraint of human nature? And this shapes the design of our social, political, and economic institutions. We don't waste energy seeking to change human nature. Rather, we build systems that incentivise moral, political, and economic flourishing as a community. The best way to describe the system that arises out of the constrained vision is democratic capitalism. Democratic capitalism is a system of three liberties: political liberty, economic liberty, and liberty in religion and conscience, arts, science, and cultural expression. Each liberty protects the other two in the triad. It is not freedom from all restraint. Personal virtue, institutions, and the law rightly order our lives together. It is, in the simplest sense, self-government. And I think Liberals and Conservatives can both affirm the picture that I have just described. That is the constrained vision. Now, can it prevail against the unconstrained vision of humanity, politics, and economics? The unconstrained vision asserts the perfectibility of humanity. People just need guidance towards the right. They need to be directed towards the right. And the best way to reorder society towards the right, noting that it has many definitions throughout the last 100 years, is to use the coercive power of the state to regulate and reorder the habits of Australian people by state or legislative means. The Labor Party, particularly the left, have embraced the unconstrained vision. Bill Shorten's National Press Club speech is a case in point. Legislating wage fixation for Australian businesses is a perfect example of where the unconstrained vision will take this country. The next Labor Greens government will invade far more of our lives than we have ever known before. So the real question tonight, therefore, is, can Liberals and Conservatives unite to ensure that a constrained vision of Australia continues into the next century? I hope so. I think we're very much on the same team. And I think we need to discard unhelpful labels and unite against the common enemy. Right now, I think we're losing terribly in the field of education. Eliot wrote that a nation's system of education is much more important than its system of government. Only a proper system of education can unify the active and the contemplative life, action and speculation, politics and art. Joseph Stalin once said that the production of souls is more important than the production of tanks. He's right. That's why the unconstrained vision lends such a focus to educating the next generation. At present, we see a creeping subjectivism or relativism across primary, secondary and tertiary levels of the Australian education system. C.S. Lewis identified the danger of this in 1943, just before the Battle of Stalingrad, when he wrote The Abolition of Man. He argued that the process of education is capable of destroying children and through them of destroying civilizations. He argued that the task of the modern educator is not to cut down jungles, but to irrigate deserts. The right defence against false sentiments is to inculcate just sentiments. By starving the sensibility of our pupils, we only make them easier prey to the propagandist when he comes. For the famished nature will be avenged, and a hard heart is no infallible protection against a soft head. Affirming that which is good about our civilization is an essential task. Right now, the left is winning this battle decisively. They carry the hearts and affections of the next generation, and countering that with reason alone is not enough. As Lewis wrote, in battle, it is not syllogisms that will keep the reluctant nerves and muscles to their post in the third hour of the bombardment. The crudest sentimentalism about a flag or a country or a regiment will be of far more use. I don't have the answers how we go forward on this question, but we must design a way ahead. Our civilisation is at stake, not just liberalism or conservatism. Much of what we take for granted in our movement, what was assumed to be true only a decade ago, is now in question. So it's my belief that it's time for action. And to finish with Eliot, from the same poem, The Four Quartets, what we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. And on that note, thank you very much, and I look forward to taking questions.